Welcome to Macquarie Street, the national political podcast coming to you from the crucible of Australian democracy. Here's your host, Lyle Shelton.
Well, it's fantastic to be joined right now by Wendy Francis, a good friend and former comrade in arms. Wendy's the National Director of Politics with the Australian Christian Lobby. She's been around politics a very, very long time, over a decade with the ACL, but certainly interested in political and cultural issues for a long time and a great campaigner for the innocence of children, the sexual campaigning for the dignity of women and girls. And Wendy, I think our viewers will agree you've done an amazing job and you're greatly appreciated, and it's a great privilege to have you on this podcast today. So welcome.
Thank you, Lyle, and it's always really good to talk to you. You took a bit of a risk on me, I think, just over a decade ago when you agreed to put me on in Queensland as State Director. So I'm always grateful to you for that, to you and Jim Wallace. But yeah, as before that, leading into that, I actually ran with Family First, and I think that was my first sort of dipped my toe in the waters of politics, and it gave me an understanding of how important politics is in terms of the well-being of our nation. But it also it did make me realise in my own position that I was better served impacting politics than being in politics. So, but it was an amazing experience running, and then to start with ACL, I've really enjoyed that journey. But
Well, there's a couple of interesting points I could pick up on there, Wendy, and we might as well. First of all, you're too kind about me and Jim because, as you well know, we actually declined you. We appointed someone else, but I think God had other ideas, and he made sure that we got you.
You cut me deep. I know. I have reminded you of that a number of times.
You have. And I couldn't sort of not be honest about that with our viewers this morning. So God had His way. We didn't get ours, and it was definitely the right thing. And I've loved working with you over the years, Wendy. You mentioned your experience with Family First. I'm glad you brought that up as well, because you almost got elected to the Senate for the state of Queensland. You came very, very close, didn't you?
Yeah, it was close. Got around 4% of the vote, and that was the first time I'd run. So I think rather than that being that people wanted me, I think what happened was that people wanted an alternative that was speaking their voice, and we were speaking their voice. We were saying enough is enough in terms of sexualisation of children. That was my main platform, and people really responded to that. So it did come close. And, if God had wanted me there, He could have had me there. But I think even though we didn't win, we got a message out. And from that time on, I'm not saying it was me, but I think there's organisations such as, Letitia Shelton, we all love and know her, City Women, Collective Shout, and the voice of ACL at that time and Family First. We have seen a reduction in the sexualised advertising. Still a long way to go, but we are seeing changes there. And so, that was a good opportunity.
Yeah, no, good on you, Wendy. And look, I think you're quite right. Progress has definitely been made over the last decade or so as lots of activists have been in the field. I still think there's a great need for a partisan political vehicle, and as viewers know, I'm still seeking to work in that space. It's been a bit of an up and down journey, but I'll have more to say about that in coming days and weeks. But Wendy, the reason for us talking today is you have helped with ACL coordinate another brilliant election survey, and you and I were involved in these over the years as well. And Jim Wallace, who you mentioned before, who really got ACL off the ground, he really pioneered this idea of a detailed, nuanced survey to help educate voters. And I'm just thrilled to see what you've produced on the ACL website for this election. I think they've come a long way since those early days. Tell our audience why it's so important that they take the 5 or 10 minutes to read a more detailed survey of what the candidates and the parties think, rather than just looking at a ticker box checklist. And that's not to demean that they have their place, but this type of long form survey, why is it so important?
So what we've tried to do is to highlight, first of all, the candidates' positions. But if there's no candidate position, then I think the fallback position is on your party. But what we've seen in the previous parliament that we're just closing out now is that whilst the Liberal Party would tick the box on religious freedom, they were not able to deliver it because some of their members actually crossed the floor. So even though they would have a tick in religious freedom, they were not able to deliver it. The Labor Party would also tick religious freedom because I seriously do believe that they want a form of religious freedom going forward. But what sort of religious freedom is that? So when you ask questions about, okay, what do you think about Christian schools being able to employ and to even unemploy somebody who does not adhere to Christian values, then that gets a little bit sticky for them. So it's all very well to have a tick that, yes, we support religious freedom, and they definitely would tick. But when you drill down, and then, particularly for the Liberal Party, who they give every single one of their members has a conscience vote on every issue, really. You've got to find out, well, how is my representative going to vote? Because there's 151 electorates, there are 151 representatives. That's why it's called the House of Representatives. There's one person from every electorate, and your representative is going to vote on behalf of you. So I think these questions are really important.
Well, they are, and particularly for the issue that you just raised there of religious freedom. And of course, this survey that you've put online, it's at vote.acl.org.au. That's vote.acl.org.au. I'll put that in the comment section later for people to go and have a look at. But that issue of religious freedom is interesting because the Liberal Party responded to your 21 questions, and they range from human rights for the unborn through to compassion for refugees from Afghanistan and the whole gamut. It's a really detailed survey, 21 questions. But on the religious freedom issue, we don't know how the individual Liberal candidates are going to vote because they haven't told us. The party has just given blanket answers on behalf of each candidate. And that's no good when you have, as we did in this parliament, 5 rebel Liberal MPs cross the floor to break an election promise and trash their government's election promise, essentially.
Correct. And we did get a letter from the Prime Minister on religious freedom and what he was promising to do post-election should he be re-elected. And his wording, he used the words that they needed a consensus. So he needs to get a consensus to actually get the religious freedom bill, religious discrimination bill through. So that's a promise, but not a promise at all in one way. So it's really important who gets elected because to get a consensus, you've got to have people who are prepared to support their leader in this.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it is disappointing that whilst it's great to have the party's position on those 21 questions, we still don't know and what the consensus is going to be in the Liberal Party. So that's a big question mark, of course. But we're a little bit critical of the Liberal Party here. But the big news about your election questionnaire is Labor. Where's Labor?
Yeah, Labor are MIA, but we did get a letter also from Mark Dreyfus, so we didn't get one from Anthony Albanese. And yet it's Anthony Albanese's office that I've been talking to mostly about this, not to him personally, but to his office. And when you get the message from his office, it's actually, there's a number of things that I felt quite encouraged by. But when we got the letter from Mark Dreyfus, it was just very high level and there was really nothing to celebrate. I have done a video just yesterday with Senator Deb O'Neill, and Deb is someone who identifies as Catholic in the Labor Party, and it was quite a frank interview, and that will be launching, towards the end of this week as well. So we do have individual people in the Labor Party who are prepared to talk to us about it, but there's no statement. I think my understanding is that what the Labor Party want to do is to immediately throw it all to the Australian Law Reform Commission, the ALRC, and that can be good or bad because we're going to have to start a campaign all over again. Yeah. I don't think that the Labor Party will pick up what we've already done.
Well, that's interesting. This is where I think probably both sides of politics are pretty much the same. They're both ducking and weaving over the religious freedom question because the sticking point really is as to whether Christian schools can be allowed to be Christian in terms of what they teach their students, the codes of conduct they have. And unfortunately, this debate's been framed as if religious schools, Christian schools are the bogeyman here, just wanting to beat up on gay and trans kids, which is a big fat lie, but it's become part of the narrative, unfortunately. And so we have this catch cry of, well, we want to protect religious rights, but also gay rights. And there's a real conundrum there, which, as you say, probably the Australian Law Reform Commission is going to have to sort out, of this campaign will start all over again, most likely.
It's so frustrating, the talk of Christian schooling, because the safest place and the kindest place and the best place for any child who is confused about their gender is in a Christian school.
Yeah,
that's where they're going to get love. That's where they're going to get accepted. That's where they're going to get truth.
Yeah. Let's just look at some of the other questions. I was interested in your question about the national curriculum. So I think we realise a lot of the reason why Australia is in such a terrible decline is young people are being brainwashed into cultural Marxism, identity politics, gender fluid ideology. And you ask a question about gender ideology, this idea that children's gender can be fluid or not, and you ask about this being taught at schools. Yet the Liberal Party, in their response, say it's not part of the curriculum. Now, that might be true in a technical sense, but it's also not true, isn't it?
No, it's not true. And it has been under the Liberal Party's watch that this has all come in, and it's been very disappointing. But there's been so many respectful relationships. We all know about safe schools, but there's a number of different types of these programs, and they are part of the national curriculum. They're part of the PE program. And if you dig into the resources, the only qualification I'd make is that I think Christian teachers can choose resources that perhaps try and avoid this, but there is no doubt that the gender ideology is being pushed through our schools, and you only need to see the huge increase, the spike in children who are identifying as gender confused or transgender, that you realise, okay, there must be something going on. And what is going on is that at school, they're constantly being told that they can choose what part of this spectrum that they're on, and it's a lie.
Yeah, it's really disappointing to see these responses from the government. I mean, I think we know that Scott Morrison, as a Christian, he has made many good comments about this whole gender issue. He says he supports Senator Claire Chandler's bill to save women's sport. He's been backing Catherine Deves, his candidate in Warringah, who is also a champion for women's rights and girls' rights. But we get these mixed messages, don't we? They're not prepared to take a stand in terms of gender ideology in the curriculum. And whilst the Prime Minister will support Claire Chandler as an individual, he's also been on the public record saying that a bill to save women's sport is not government policy. So what are we to make of all this? Even the response from the Liberal Party in the questionnaire is confusing as opposed to their public comments.
Yeah, it's a real shame that these sort of bills need to come as private members' bills, and then they don't get the support. And yet, as you say, publicly, the Prime Minister was very supportive of it. I think, even one of the debates that was held, both of the opposition leader and the Prime Minister were asked, what is a woman? And they both gave the right answer. So they realised that there's something going on. They'd obviously been primed with that to know what to say, that Australians would actually accept. So they're able to say it in a question like that. But when it comes to teaching children, they're actually teaching them something completely different. And so for Claire Chandler's bill, she's had so much support. And we will be pushing, and I think we should really get everybody pushing that this actually does get presented and get voted on. It's the same as George Christensen's bill, the Born Alive bill. And I'm going off track there a little bit. Again, it's another one of those private members' bills that everybody says, oh, yeah, no, it's a good bill, but it's never going to be a government bill.
Yeah. I want to come back to the pro-life issues, but just to round off that discussion about gender, the Liberal Party response to your questionnaire says that the Morrison government is committed to saving women's sport. I'm paraphrasing. People can go and have a look at the questionnaire. But I was disappointed to see the Prime Minister say, when he was asked about Catherine Deves and her support for Claire Chandler's bill, that he said the government has no plans for a government bill to save women's sport. So, we all know that if it's left in the domain of a private senator's bill, it'll go nowhere. But we've got, conflicting advice from the Liberal Party in terms of your questionnaire, the response there, and what the Prime Minister has said publicly. So, again, it just underscores the need for discernment from voters, doesn't it? We've just got to be so careful.
Yeah, and I'm really, like, Saturday night, one of the seats we'll all be watching is Catherine Deves, and wouldn't it be great if she got elected? Because you'd have her there, you'd have Claire Chandler, down there. You'd also, Jacinta Price is another one who is really pushing this.
Absolutely.
And so we've got some strong women in there.
Yeah.
Saying, no, this is going to be, a government bill, then, I reckon we can make it happen.
I think they will. I think between Jacinta and if Catherine Deves does get off the line, and it's certainly looking like it's possible. She's still behind, but she's made up a lot of ground on Zali Steggall. You've also got Senator Alex Antich down there in South Australia, who's not up for re-election, but whose term extends into the next parliament, and he's someone who has been strong on this. He famously asked our chief health bureaucrat, Brendan Murphy, what is a woman? That went viral. So, Wendy, the pro-life issues, you mentioned George Christensen, who sadly is leaving the parliament. His Born Alive bill, that didn't get support from the Liberals either, did it?
No, it didn't. And what they tried to do is to sort of say this doesn't happen. And it's absolutely crazy. I don't have the stats on me, but I'm happy to give them later and be able to put in your comments, because the stats are really quite high. We're talking about hundreds of babies around Australia in the past decade that have been born alive, post an abortion, have been viable babies and have been left to die. Now, this is a tragedy of enormous stature. And for any Australian, it is barbaric. And so George's bill was totally reasonable. He wasn't asking for every baby to be resuscitated after an abortion. He was saying babies at the same gestation who are given, so in one room in a hospital, you can have a baby who is born at 26 weeks and is given every medical care to survive. And they survive, and they not just survive, they thrive. And in the room down the corridor, there can be a baby born at the same gestation that is a failed abortion. Baby survives. Baby is given no medical care, no pain relief, no love. This is just barbaric.
Yeah, no, it is, Wendy. It seems unbelievable that the Liberals could give these sort of responses to questions, because you're quite right. George did provide all that information. He even had the Parliamentary Library research that they validated everything he was saying about this being a problem for hundreds of babies. It's no small thing. But again, the other aspect of their questionnaire, you asked them about funding and tying federal government, i.e. our taxpayer money, to public hospitals, that their funding would be contingent upon them performing abortions. Now, this is the Liberal Party again saying they supported that proposition, which was a proposition which the radical Tanya Plibersek from Labor took to the 2019 election. And now it's Liberal Party policy at this election. Again, this is what your survey has flushed out, these really important nuances in the debate, and it just shows, sadly, that the coalition, the Liberals and the Nationals, are just as extreme as some of the most extreme in Labor, that they would take money away from public hospitals unless they perform abortion to birth, which is what our laws allow.
And one of the most recent revelations has been a letter from the coalition under the signature of the Prime Minister, which I still find hard to believe that he actually read the letter, but I understand that he has defended the letter. But it states that not only are we proud of our abortion services that we provide here in Australia, but even more than that, we want to actually push them out into our neighbouring countries where we give foreign aid. This is like when I heard George Christensen read that out and say that it was from the coalition and from the Prime Minister, I needed to see it for myself, because I just thought this can't be right. This is a shame on our nation and a cloud that hangs over us constantly. And the thing that I'm excited about is, we went to the March for Life here in Brisbane just recently, and the age group is young.
Yeah.
They're not me. They're not, there's a lot of me there too.
You're young, Wendy. You're young.
Young at heart. But I tell you what, it's there is a young pro-life generation rising up.
Yeah.
And, to see those members of Parliament on the stage, we had Matt Canavan, we had George Christensen, we had Michael Senator Michael Roberts. We had Amanda Stoker, who is an absolute champion. If we lose her, that will be a really devastation. But
yes. Oh, look, I agree. Look, and those One Nation and Coalition MPs you mentioned, they are all champions. The fact that they go to that annual march in Brisbane that Cherish Life so wonderfully puts on every year is just terrific. That letter you mentioned that George Christensen released at that letter, I, like many others, put that on my Facebook page. And I don't mind saying, I will say this. I received a phone call from a cabinet minister a couple of nights later, very upset with me for posting that and trying to defend the letter. But I just said to him, look, this is what the words say. The Prime Minister's signature's there. I said, the Prime Minister needs to clarify this. Now, we'll have to wait and see. But like you, Wendy, I was shocked and devastated to see that a Christian Prime Minister would sign a letter supporting abortion and the funding of it and the promotion of it to our region through our overseas aid program. I mean, at least he could have said the Liberal Party's policy is a conscience vote. There was other things he could have said, but he chose not to. He chose a full-throated support that Tanya Plibersek could have written.
Yeah, in response to George Christensen asking for babies born alive to be given pain relief. To be honest, it just made my heart just weep. Yeah.
No, that's a big one. And look, we've been very critical, obviously, and for good reasons. We're picking apart the responses, and I just want to reiterate again, as you said earlier, Labor didn't even respond. They haven't even given, probably the biggest, well, certainly one of the biggest political lobby groups in the country, the courtesy of a response so that the constituency can know where they stand on these key issues.
Yeah, and I think we do know where they stand too, don't we, Lyle? Because on the abortion issue, they have some very strong advocates for abortion to birth for any reason. They have the Emily's List, so women get financial support to run for the Labor Party if they will support, again, abortion to birth for any reason. And so I think we know where they stand on this, but it's disappointing that they won't actually put it down in writing because they know the response from the Christian constituency will not be supportive. And they went to this election, they went to this term of government saying we're going to reconnect with Christians. This is a big one for Christians. Yeah,
look, I think that's right. And you mentioned Senator Deb O'Neill, the Labor senator from New South Wales, who is a wonderful woman, and I think is very, very sincere. But I think, this is my editorial comment, I think she's trapped in a party that, despite her best wishes and best intent to reconnect with the Christian constituency, particularly in Western Sydney, where they lost it big time last election, it really, to me, seems a forlorn hope. But you don't have to comment on that if you don't want to. But,
my comment would be that we need good people in both of those major parties.
Yeah, we do. And Deb is certainly one of the good ones, and Don Farrell in South Australia is another one. And Helen Polly, of course, in Tasmania. Now we're naming names, but there's some of the outstanding ones. We do need them there, but they certainly are limited, as are many in the Liberal Party on standing up on these issues. Wendy, time's getting away, but I want to cover a couple other quick issues as well as and comment on some of the minor parties as well that have responded in detail. But we started off at the top of this interview. You mentioned your passion for the sexualisation of children, trying to stop that. You've got a terrific question there about age verification online. Now, again, responses there disappointing from the major parties.
Really disappointing because there was a cross-party committee that presented a report early 2020. So it was just as COVID hit. And the thing that frustrates me about that is COVID hit and it sort of lost its momentum. Mind you, I'm always a little bit sceptical about these reports from committees because we seem to spend so much time in committees and then nothing happens. But we lost the momentum. But then during COVID, this was the absolute most important time because kids were at home, they were online, and we had no protections for them. And so this report was protecting the innocent, protecting the age of innocence. That beautiful name for a government report, protecting the age of innocence. And what it was suggesting was that we need age verification laws similar to what we have in gambling. So it's not, so I've got grandchildren. I've got an 11-year-old grandson. It would not be easy for my 11-year-old grandson to gamble. There are gates and doors and hurdles that he would have to go through. He would have to actually take his parents credit card and their license and these sort of things from their wallet. So it would have to be a very considered action, and my little grandson would actually not even think of those things, and most 11-year-olds wouldn't. So there are gates. With pornography, no gates, nothing. You click on a link beside one of your games. Like you can be in Strawberry Shortcake game and click on a link and find yourself in the depths of the most depraved pornography like that, just a click. And so what this report was saying is we need the same gates as we have for gambling as we do to have for pornography. But, there's a pushback because people don't want to give their ID to go and look at pornography. If they're so ashamed of it that they don't want to give their ID, then, that says enough, isn't it? But they will not even protect their children because they want to actually have the freedom to be able to click on that link at any time. And we have to protect our children. And so this report was an excellent report, but it's gone by the wayside at the moment. But we continually bring that up. And we do have a few champions. Julian Simmons, who is actually my LNP guy here in Ryan, where I live, he is one of our champions in this. So there are some, but not enough again. And it makes me wonder, this is my commentary, I guess, too, but it makes me just wonder who is wanting those clicks to be left free.
Yes, you wonder what the vested interests are that affect even the Liberal Party, while there's a Christian Prime Minister, etc., and so many good people, many of whom we've mentioned in this interview, and yet there isn't the will and the courage to implement something as basic as age verification, despite, a Senate report, which, as you say, lays all the evidence for it out very clearly. So, no, good on you. We just got to keep up the fight, and the importance of having those questions at election time is just helps elevate that. So good on you. We haven't mentioned the minor parties very much, Wendy, and we should, I guess. So you had, I noticed that they were much better in letting the individual candidates respond. So if you go on the vote.acl.org.au site, you can go to your local electorate. You can click on, so I'm living in Sydney. I'm in the electorate of Bradfield. I can click on there. I can see all the candidates. It's really brilliant. I can click on the minor party, the UAP guy, for instance, and he gets a green tick 21 out of 21. Now, that's not a commentary on whether I like Clive Palmer or not, but the individual candidate there has given really good answers to these really vital questions. And that's right throughout the nation. You'll see red or green there. So just tell us about your impression of the response from the One Nation, UAP, Lib Dems, and these so-called freedom parties, which seem to have energised a lot of people on the centre-right of politics.
Yeah, I'd have to say that they're a mixed bag. So we've had a few forums as well, and there are some amazing candidates in these so-called freedom parties, the minor parties, and people that I would definitely think, wow, I'd vote for that person. But then they have, as I say, it's sort of like a fruit box, I think, in one way, because there's people who they allow their people to have more wide-ranging views. We are missing, I think, a party that sticks to just one, has one basic tenet of these are our Christian values and this is what we're going to stick to. So, for instance, in One Nation, they have one of the best pro-life policies that I've ever seen. But Pauline Hanson herself is not necessarily pro-life. She is a supporter of euthanasia, for instance. And so then you go to the Liberal Democrats, you have Campbell Newman, who is a personal friend of mine and Peter's. But he is a strong supporter of euthanasia. But again, in the Liberal Democrats, you've got some of their candidates who are strongly pro-life. And this is why, again, we need to really be careful about the candidates and not just follow a party. We need to look at, so these minor parties are always more inclined to answer the questionnaire because they don't get the same platform. When we turn on the TV at night, we always see Albanese and we see Morrison and we see some of their people standing behind them, the chosen ones, but we don't see the minor parties so much. So they're always keen to answer the questionnaires, and that's actually helpful for us.
I reckon it's very helpful because there needs to be a contest for ideas, and the fact that you've gone to the trouble to get their responses, that they've been given the freedom to put this on the record, does give people genuine choice. And if we're to see movement on some of these intractable issues, like the life issues, like the freedom issues, like the sexualisation of children, the political system's going to need competition to put pressure on Labor and Liberal, isn't it?
It really is. And so I do reiterate to everybody that no vote is a wasted vote. So if you vote for a minor party, number one, and then you very carefully put out your preferences below so that your preferences flow to the major party that you desire, should that your minor party not win, then you are not wasting your vote. Be very careful about your preferences. Don't follow the how to vote cards, just do your own. But no vote is a wasted vote. And sometimes when we get a high register for a pro-life candidate that might be from a minor party and they might not win, but they get a high percentage, it does a couple of things. It actually allows them to run again because there's some funding for them to run again. Their party gets to run again, but also it sends a very clear message to the politicians and to the constituency at large.
Yeah. Wendy, we've got a few. How are you going for time? Have you got a couple of more minutes?
I'm good, Lyle.
We really appreciate your generosity. We've got a few audience, some great comments here. I might just read some of those and get you to comment here. Roseanne says, if the LNP has lied in answering the ACL survey, then that should be noted somehow so that they do not get away with confusing people. That's a fair comment. Barry says the LNP have been very weak on these issues. Heather says, makes one feel sick to know that babies born alive are left to die. There's a lot of disappointment in the comments about, I guess, the current state of our politics that allows these things.
Yeah. I'm not sure that the Liberal Party have lied in our questions. I think their answers are disappointing in many cases, but I'm not sure that they have lied. I do believe that Scott Morrison is a follower of Jesus. I think he's also a very good politician. And I've been grateful to have somebody who follows Jesus as the leader of our nation. But there's been a lot of disappointment as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Wendy. I've no doubt of his personal faith and commitment. In fact, the church I was attending in Brisbane, if he was in town, he would often come just without any fanfare and come and worship there. And I admire that about him. But like you and so many of our viewers today, I think there's disappointment about what seems to be the pragmatism that goes with politics. And there's got to be some way to be a Daniel or a Joseph, to take a principled position and let God honour you, I guess, in that position without perhaps the compromises that we see. I
have heard of someone like that. His name's Lyle Shelton.
Well, that's why I'm not the Prime Minister.
But it is somebody who doesn't compromise on what we can't compromise. Like the truth is, politics is about compromise, and that we have to, the Prime Minister has to govern for all Australians. But there are lines, aren't there? There are this far and no further. So. I will not cross this line, and I will not compromise on life.
That's right. And I think even if you can just be, state your personal position, and people, I think, understand there's constraints in politics that not even a Christian Prime Minister can shift, but at least you can be an advocate for it and perhaps just not say what needs to be said to appease a very woke left-wing media, as we so often see. One thing we haven't talked about, Lois says, what about the Manus Island situation? That gets forgotten, and I know many young people who are voting Greens because of this issue. You've got a question on refugees there, which I thought was a good one. But I know it doesn't quite go to Manus, but yeah.
No, look, I think that the Manus Island situation is complicated, and I think there are things that our government know that we don't know that would affect how we think about that. I know that there are some people who for various reasons cannot just be accepted into Australia. There is a very detailed system of checking people, and we don't know all of that. And so in a way, I think let's shift our minds to things that we do know, and let's do what we can do. And the questions that we were asking were particularly for aid assistance to people wanting to flee from Afghanistan, where we're seeing Probably 1 million children will die from starvation this year alone, let alone the persecution that the women are receiving from the Taliban. And so that's something that we can do, and that is something that the Scott Morrison government has actually really budgeted for. So we're grateful for that. But the other issue is people who've been on temporary protection visas for sometimes up to a decade, 8 years. They've been respectable people in our communities. So they have done everything that complied to every law. The problem for them now is that their children are getting to the stage where their children want to assimilate in as much as even go to university. And the children can't go to university in our nation without paying international student fees, which often precludes them. So there needs to be some sort of solution for these people who have been on temporary protection visas because they came by boat in a certain period of time. We need to somehow work out what is the pathway to permanency for them. I don't believe that allowing a small number of people to move into a pathway for permanency is going to all of a sudden start the boats. I think that we've got that under control. We need to keep turning back the boats because the boats are just killing people. But there are a certain number of people who are desperately needing assistance.
Yeah, that's really well said, Wendy. I think you put that brilliantly. I mean, no one wants to see Australia return to flotillas that were coming across from Indonesia. You've only got to look at the drone footage of people streaming across the US southern border at the moment at the hands of people smugglers and the drug cartels. We certainly don't want that here. But as you say, there's got to be a way to help those small number of people who have been caught in the system and trapped in limbo land for so long. Yeah. Well, Wendy, it's going to be a big day on Saturday, really important for the future of our country. What's your prediction, just to put you on the spot?
Yeah, so a wise man once said, don't predict an election. Do you know, last time I reckon the coalition's going to win. This time I'm not so sure. I think that there's been a shift. The last term of government, the last 3 years has been pretty tough for all Australians. We've had the COVID. There's an anxiousness in our nation that only God can fill, to be honest. But that they, in search of what that is, I think that people are going to want to change because they're looking for something different, and they really should find that in God. But at the moment, we've had the floods, we've had fires, we've had even the war in Ukraine is very unsettling for people. The China factor, and then of course COVID. I think people are thinking we need anything but the same. So I think we could see a change of government.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Wendy. I think it makes it all the more reason, as we were saying earlier, that people are careful with their preferences. I'm just going to say up front that I wouldn't like to see the coalition lose government. I think they're a better alternative, despite the major weaknesses that you and I have discussed in the last half hour. But I think if you're worried about freedom of speech and freedom of religion and all of these things, it's going to be much worse under a Labor Greens government. This is me being partisan. I know ACL's non-partisan, but I just think we need to be very careful with what we do with our preferences. By all means, vote for a so-called Freedom Party, but check where the candidates stand, and you've given us the tools to do that. But make sure those preferences, go to one of the major parties. And I would say, if you really want to protect freedom, make sure your preferences go back to the coalition. They don't exhaust or end up, with the Greens or Teals or Labor. But that's just my commentary, Wendy. But I don't want to put you in there. Wendy, you've been very gracious. I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate the hard work that you and the team at ACL have done. It's just fantastic to see the work going from strength to strength, and the quality of the voter education and the information, and the terrific campaign that you're running against those who cross the floor on religious freedom is fantastic. So, Wendy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Lyle. Thanks for having me.